And we are going to pass a simple flat tax. Where every American can fill out our taxes on a postcard. And when we do that, we should abolish the IRS. You know, the corruption in Washington, no issue expresses that better than the issue of immigration. Immigration is a law enforcement matter, it's a national security matter, but immigration at its heart is an economic matter. When you allow 12 million people to come into this country illegally, it takes jobs from millions of Americans, from millions of legal immigrants, and it drives down wages for everybody. Now, here's the unfortunate truth. Neither party wants to solve this problem. The Democrats support illegal immigration because they view it as votes. You know, there's a new politically correct term for illegal immigrants. It's called undocumented Democrats. Sir, thank you for being here. I got to say, I would be disappointed if I'd come to the University of Maine and had no protesters at all. So I appreciate your bringing your sign. Let's actually talk about what your sign says. Your sign says, oh good, we got another one. Oh, two, much better, much better. And we have a third, all right. You know, it's amazing. I understand that you guys got confused and thought this was a Bernie Sanders rally. And I understand as well that it is very, very difficult for young people used to being coddled in universities where you got safe zones and trigger warnings to be scared and frightened by hearing this thing called the truth. Now, let's take a minute to talk about your sign there, young man. So you wrote a sign that says no human being is illegal. Now that's true. Every human being is God's creation, is a precious gift from God. But if you really believe that no human being can break the law, you will discover the falsity of that if you resist the police officer right there. And let me tell you something else. As a Texan, we've got in Texas 1,200 miles of border with Mexico. So apparently, they hear there's a Mexican border and they start chanting Bernie. Build bridges, not walls. You know, that is a very interesting statement. But, you know, I'm curious. What do you say to all the people who lose their jobs? What do you say to all the people whose wages are driven down? What do you say to all the single moms who cannot afford to provide for their families? Sir, I appreciate your exercising your First Amendment rights, but the First Amendment does not give you the right to silence others. If you want to hold a rally, knock yourself out. But by the way, you know the people being hurt by illegal immigration? Many of them are African Americans. Many of them are Hispanics, are legal immigrants and citizens. You know who isn't hurt by illegal immigration? Rich people. Wall Street loves it. So I appreciate you guys protesting in support of Wall Street. Because Wall Street views illegal immigration as cheap labor. They'd love 12 million to become 20 million. It drives wages down. They'd love it to become 30 million. It drives wages down. So you guys are terrific activists for corporate CEOs that don't want to pay working men and women a fair wage. But listen, you can understand that. When you have people in school who've never had this strange thing called a job, they tend to be enticed by promises of free stuff. Have you noticed that's how the Democrats campaign? Free stuff for everyone. Free health care, free college, a chicken in every pot. If you're in Colorado, pot in every chicken. But as you get a little bit older, as you actually experience the world, you'll understand the first principle of economics is called Tanstoffel. There ain't no such thing as a free lunch. Anytime you have a politician coming to you saying, I'm going to give you something for free, let me tell you something. Everything government gives from you, first it takes from you. If you're wondering why young people are coming out of school right now and can't get jobs, it's because we've had 7 years of taxes and regulations killing small businesses. And if you end up doing the Bernie Sanders, jacking up taxes even more, okay, maybe you'll get a free college tuition. And then when you come out, you'll have no jobs. So it'll be really nice to sit on the street saying, I'm really learned, but I can't actually pay my bills. The corruption in Washington is the Democrats are in search of free votes, but the Republicans are listening to Wall Street and the special interests, and they want cheap labor. And you've got a total breakdown. Now, in this election, everyone says that they oppose illegal immigration. If you want to know where someone stands, there's no better moment to determine it than where they were in 2013 during the battle over the Gang of Eight amnesty bill. Now, one of my opponents joined with Barack Obama and the Democrats in leading the fight to push for amnesty. I made a very different decision to honor the commitments I made to the men and women who elected me and lead the fight to defeat amnesty. And my third opponent, Donald Trump. When the Gang of Eight amnesty bill was being fought, where was Donald? Actually, what Donald was doing at the time was funding the Gang of Eight. Of the 8 members of the Gang of Eight, Donald funded 5 of them, gave them over $50,000. And you know what? Last night, we saw something very interesting. Typically in elections, you have Republicans, they run to the right in the primary. Then as soon as they get the nomination, they run to the left. It's part of why we're so frustrated, because they make all these promises to get our vote, and then they immediately break the promises when they go to Washington. Last night was interesting because Donald has started running to the left, not in the primary, not in the general, but already in the primary. Did you notice how many times he said the word flexible? We got to be flexible. He said, you got to be flexible on everything. Everything is up for negotiation. Let me tell you, when a politician tells you he's going to be flexible, that means he's getting ready to stick it to you. Here's what flexible for a politician always means. I'm going to go with the big money donors, and leave the working men and women out in the cold. That's why Donald Trump supported Barack Obama's bailout of Wall Street, the TARP bailout, because, hey, there's some big banks with a lot of money. But we don't need flexibility. We need a president who does what he says, who you know where he stands. And here's what's going to happen. If I'm elected president, we will repeal every word of Obamacare. We will pass a flat tax and abolish the IRS. We will stop amnesty and secure the borders. And the result is going to be small businesses exploding, millions of new jobs, wages going up for everybody, and young people coming out of school with 2, 3, 4 job opportunities, a brighter future. That's how we do it. That's what made America great in the first place. The second critical issue in this election is freedom. Our fundamental rights, reflected in the Bill of Rights, reflected in the Constitution. And I got to say, a couple of weeks ago, Justice Scalia's passing underscored the stakes of this election. Justice Scalia was someone I was blessed to know personally for 20 years. I began my career as a law clerk at the U.S. Supreme Court, clerking for Chief Justice William Rehnquist. I spent north of a decade litigating, arguing cases before the U.S. Supreme Court. Justice Scalia was a lion of the law. He was a ferocious defender of the Bill of Rights. And Justice Scalia's passing underscores that this election is not just about one branch of government, it is two. We are one liberal justice away from a radical 5-justice liberal majority that will undermine the fundamental rights of every individual here. We are one liberal justice away from the Supreme Court taking away our religious liberty and allowing the government to force each of us to violate our faith upon pain of prison or fine. We are one liberal justice away from the Supreme Court ordering 10 Commandments displays to be torn down all over this nation. We are one liberal justice away from the Supreme Court effectively erasing the Second Amendment from the Bill of Rights. Let me stop on that one for a minute. You know, some folks in the media, or some of our friends with Bernie, might say, gosh, isn't that an exaggeration? Do you really mean erasing the Second Amendment? Well, let's talk about it. Justice Scalia's most significant majority opinion was a case called Heller versus District of Columbia. Now, I know Heller very, very well because I represented 31 states in the Heller case defending the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. And we won 5-4. But Heller was 5-4. And what was the position of the 4 liberal justices? It wasn't that some gun control is sometimes permissible. We could argue about that, but that wasn't what they said. No, the position of the 4 liberal justices was that the Second Amendment does not protect any individual right to keep and bear arms whatsoever. That it is only a, quote, collective right of the militia, which is fancy lawyer talk for a non-existent right. One more liberal justice, and Heller will be overruled. And the consequence of that is the government could make it a crime for any one of us to own a firearm, and none of us would have a Second Amendment right to challenge that in court. That's what the stakes are. And I'll tell you, we are one liberal justice away from the Supreme Court ordering that veterans memorials all over this country, if they have religious symbols on them, must be torn to the ground. We are one liberal justice away from the Supreme Court making us subject to the authority of the World Court and the United Nations and international law and giving up American sovereignty. Now, on the flip side, we are one conservative justice away from the Supreme Court overruling the Kelo decision and stopping eminent domain from taking private property to give it to big corporations. Now, in last night's debate, and in the debate a week ago, Donald Trump took the time to lecture me on this question. He said, "Listen, Ted, I've known a lot more politicians than you have." And you know what? He's right. I mean, listen, he's been supporting liberal Democratic politicians since I was in diapers. It wasn't that recently, thankfully. And Donald said, when it comes to religious liberty, when it comes to the Supreme Court, he said, "Ted, you've got to be willing to compromise. You've got to be willing to negotiate. You've got to be willing to work out a deal with the Democrats." Well, let me be very, very clear to the men and women of Maine. I will not compromise away your religious liberty. And I will not compromise away your Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. And when Donald Trump says that he's willing to cut a deal with Harry Reid and Chuck Schumer to agree on Justice Scalia's replacement, any judge that Harry Reid and Chuck Schumer sign off on is going to be a liberal activist who's going to take away our rights. And I'll tell you this, I give you my solemn commitment. Every justice I put on the Supreme Court will be a principled constitutionalist who will faithfully and ferociously protect the Bill of Rights for your children and for mine. The third critical issue in this election is security. In the last 7 years, we have abandoned our friends and allies, and we have shown weakness and appeasement to our enemies. You know, again, that moment became clear in the debate last week when Donald Trump said he would be neutral between Israel and the Palestinians. Well, let me be very clear. As president, I have no intention of being neutral. America will stand unapologetically with the nation of Israel. And you know, anyone who expresses this notion of neutrality, look, what Donald is saying is frankly the very same thing that Hillary Clinton says, which is that you should be neutral between the two. Anyone who expresses that does not understand the difference between our friends and enemies, does not understand, accepts the media's moral relativism that it's all equivalent. Listen, it is not equivalent. A terrorist who walks into a mall with dynamite around his chest and blows it up to murder women and children is not equivalent to the soldiers who are protecting innocent civilians. And one of the most dangerous things we've seen in the last 7 years has been the weakening of our military, the weakening of our readiness, the plummeting of morale. And you know, we've seen this before. We've seen a weak leftist Democratic president undermine the military in Jimmy Carter. And what happened? Ronald Reagan came into office in 1981. He passed tax reform and regulatory reform. He lifted the boot of the government off the backs of small businesses. And what happened? The economy took off. Millions of high-paying jobs, trillions of new revenue into the government. He used that money to rebuild the military, and we bankrupted the Soviet Union and won the Cold War. I intend to do the exact same thing with radical Islamic terrorism. No longer will we have a military governed by political correctness. The top priority of our military will not be gluten-free MREs. We're going to repeal Obamacare, pass a flat tax, the economy is going to explode. We're going to use that revenue to rebuild our military so it remains the mightiest fighting force on the face of the planet. And we will have a commander-in-chief who stands up and makes clear to the world, we will defeat radical Islamic terrorism. We'll have a president willing to utter the words, radical Islamic terrorism. And one of the most tragic things that has happened in the last 7 years has been this president sending our fighting men and women into combat with rules of engagement that tie their arms behind their back, that make it impossible for them to win, for them to defeat the enemy, for them to keep themselves safe. That is wrong. It is immoral. And mark my words, in January 2017, it will end. America has always been reluctant to use military force. We are slow to anger. But if and when, I love a startled college student. Look, I get the college Marxist professors tell you that America is the source of everything bad in the world. It is a lie that is pitched only in universities. We are reluctant to use military force, but if and when it is needed, we should use overwhelming force, kill the enemy, and then get the heck out! Well said. Listen, and God bless you. This election is a fundamental choice. If you are one of the 65% of Republicans who recognize that Donald Trump is not the best candidate, to go head-to-head with Hillary Clinton. He might be formidable in the Democratic primary. You recognize that if we nominate Donald Trump, that is a catastrophe for Republicans, a catastrophe for conservatives, a catastrophe for America. Donald Trump might be literally the only man on the face of the earth that could lose a general election to Hillary Clinton. If you recognize that, Super Tuesday made something very, very clear. No, I'm afraid that's not what Super Tuesday made clear. But, you know, I do enjoy the courage of young people. Yell something and run. It's a good move. Please don't hurt me with those scary facts. If you recognize that Donald Trump would be a disaster, what Super Tuesday made abundantly clear is there is only one campaign that has repeatedly beaten Donald Trump, and there is only one campaign that can and will beat Donald Trump. So I want to take a minute to speak to people who had been or may be now supporting other candidates in this race. Maybe you were a supporter of Jeb Bush or Chris Christie or Ben Carson or Rand Paul. Maybe you're a supporter now of Marco Rubio or John Kasich. Let me just say to each of you and to the folks at home, if you have supported or you are supporting these other good people, and you don't want to see Donald Trump as the nominee, the only campaign that can beat him is ours. And so I want to tell each of you, we welcome you with open arms. Welcome to the team. Join our team. Let us stand together and pull the country back from the abyss. You know, it is interesting to see a candidate stand up and say, I will make America great again. You know, let's be real honest. No candidate running for president is going to make America great. We've had 7 years of a self-centered narcissist in the White House. Contrary to his beliefs, his election did not magically stop the rise of the oceans. If you want to make America great again, the only force powerful enough to do that is not me, it's not Donald Trump, it's not any candidate for president. The only force powerful enough to do that is we, the people. This is our time. This is the time where the people stand up to Washington and say, enough is enough. Bring back freedom. Bring back our basic liberties. I ask each of you to stand with us and vote with us here in Maine. And don't just do that. Bring 5, 10 other people. Pick up the phone and call your friends, call your family, call your loved ones, and say this election matters. It matters to me. It matters to my kids. It matters to my grandkids. And by the way, for those of you who may not yet be old enough to vote, if you bring 10 other people to vote, you will have voted 10 times before you turn 18. That is the power of this election. It will be won person to person, friend to friend, neighbor to neighbor, pastor to pastor. It took Jimmy Carter to give us Ronald Reagan. And I am convinced the most long-lasting legacy of Barack Obama is going to be a new generation of leaders in the Republican Party who stand and fight for liberty, who stand and fight for the Constitution, and who stand and fight for the Judeo-Christian values that built this great nation. Thank you, and God bless you.
Well, if you ask me where I come from, here's what I tell